Welcome back to Jack's Corner, where truth and reality have a seat at the table. You know, as Greek officials have just warned Europe, there is 500,000 migrants ready to surge into Europe from North Africa. Many European countries, particularly France, Germany, Italy, and the United Kingdom, are like terminally ill patients who have been transferred to hospice in their final days. My nephew just returned from London and reported that practically every other person he saw was from the Middle East or wearing burqas or head coverings. What we are experiencing is equivalent to the sacking of Rome by the barbarians, if you know your history, and you should. The mighty Roman Empire fell for many reasons, but much due to the debauchery that consumed the empire that made them think they were invincible. And maybe we do too. Yes, the barbarians were primitive and correctly named barbarian, but it didn't prevent them from destroying what was, up until that time, the greatest empire on earth. Now we have the Western Empire built upon Christian ethics, but the mentally aberrant, delusional, and psychotic atheists, better known as liberals in the left today, have once again delivered us to the barbarians. Well, many liberals and leftists and socialists and climate change delusionalists bought into the lies fostered by China, Iran, and Russia. Now, I place the greatest blame on one person with regard to what's happened in Europe, and that is the radically leftist feminist leader of Germany, Angela Merkel, another white liberal woman who put her feelings before facts, allowing millions from cultures that hate the West and Western culture to flood into Europe. The same has occurred in the United States, and we saw that under Biden. The one thing they all have in common is that at their core, they are atheists. They live in futility. They hate the very pillars of society that allowed the Western culture to advance, which brought more people out of poverty and brought us the greatest advances in economics, medicine, and sciences, and basically infrastructure that allowed so many people to flourish and live happy lives. Christian values were at the core of this advancement, and unfortunately, they and those who benefited became lazy and slothful and sat back in their comfort and ease, denying that anything bad could happen because they felt themselves so advanced, much like Rome before it collapsed before the barbarians. We have barbarians today, and I call them liberals, leftists, socialists, communists. People, you got to wake up. Many have wondered over the years how such advanced civilizations like the Grecian and the Roman empires could have collapsed. But then again, history does repeat itself, and we today are not immune. As my mentor once asked me, he says, "Jack, what is the definition of peace?" And before I could answer, he said, "Well, it's when your enemies are dead." Well, that's pretty profound. At first, I found that kind of harsh, but then as I contemplated on it, it made sense. The first thing I did is define the term enemy, look up the term enemy, upon which I realized it's the person or the thing that wants me dead. And with that, basically in existence, how can I really live in peace? How can any of us live in peace when we've got people in a religion, particularly Islam, that says they're going to kill us all? We're all infidels. Most everybody watching this podcast, you're an infidel, and they're telling you what they're going to do, and we've watched what they've done. And aren't you concerned about it? You should be. Unfortunately, too many live in the delusion that there are such things as coexistence with the enemy. There is not. And that is why I pray that Trump will finish off, the Iranians and not leave them to reconstitute. Just think about it. In just the last 3 months, Iran has attacked 14 of its neighbors. The problem in America is that we have too many barbarians. And like I've just said, the liberals, the socialists, the atheists, and that sort. And they're okay with Iran having the nuclear bomb. It is that sort that will destroy civilized societies. And it all stems from the belief system that is atheism, that renders one incapable of sound and realistic decision-making. It is, in fact, a judgment, and I'm not so sure that we will be spared. Remember, this sort of enemy never surrenders. They are like the Iranians. Even with the destruction of their army, they still bluster and threaten from the dust. Just as you cannot negotiate with the devil, you can't negotiate with his emissaries. And in today's world, they are found at the intersection of communism and Islam. Again, there can be no coexistence. Some people think coexistence. Well, these are non-coexisting type entities and belief systems and worldviews. You cannot coexist with them. It has to be obliterated. Just like a weed that is snipped off at the ground, it will surely come back unless its root is destroyed. Western culture is indeed in crisis, and unless we get back to our Christian values, we will fall. Now, while many are perplexed at the plight the West and Christianity is in, I believe it is found in the laziness of the people, and particularly Christians. Now, some will say, well, I pray about it, but a prayer without feet arrives nowhere. And that's what I see all the time. True Christians are not lacking in discernment, folks, nor do they possess idleness. Think about that. But Christians are plagued by it all the time today, even in how they vote and who they vote for. We are losing and will lose our freedoms, as we have just seen in the United Kingdom and Canada, where freedom of speech and freedom of religion are gone. Folks, may those responsible for it burn in hell eternally. I know that maybe rubs some Christians wrong, but I'll tell you what, that type of evil, there is no sin in hating evil, and that is pure evil what these people have done. And it was intentional. It wasn't an accident. Of course, I guess that's a redundancy because only a heathen would do that anyway, do the things that they've done. Freedom does not linger nor keep partnership with the idol. Are you one of them? If so, you must free yourselves and your souls from the tyranny of your addiction to convenience and comfort. A life without purpose finds futility and emptiness, ending at death's door in utter humiliation. The first of many agonies those who find themselves there will endure. However, such humiliation is of our own creation, having spurned with ingratitude the gratuitous and undeserved gifts given us by the sweat and blood of so many that have gone before us. Our ignorance today of the evil overcoming us is without excuse, having been self-imposed. Our enemies overwhelm us not by force, but by invitation. Evil has never had a better idea nor relief for any of our human conditions, yet we, like the dog that returns to its vomit, are all too ready to embrace once again the errors of our past, making us such an undeserving lot. Our condition as a nation and the threats that we face are not due to evil being so superior, but because we allow it. Many will know their fate before death takes them, as hell will begin upon the realization that their lives were misspent or spent on anything and everything of temporal value. They will realize that little sacrifice or suffering did they experience in the pursuit of selfless labor or righteous causes, or the protection of the values and virtues that made this country a sanctuary for freedom. So with that monologue, let's look at some relevant consequences and current events that should have some impact upon you. Let's look at Senator Rick Scott, a Republican senator from Florida, who criticized a House Democrat leader after Representative Jay Paul of Washington admitted that she had spoken to ambassadors from Mexico and other countries to get oil to Cuba. Imagine that. A House Democrat member openly admitting to aiding a communist adversary in coordination with foreign countries to violate American sanctions. Scott wrote that those sanctions were put in place to keep Americans safe and to hold the Castro and Canal regime accountable for their crimes. Jayapal and her foreign incompatible culture with America hates this country and is attempting to destroy it from the inside. Abraham Lincoln warned us about the destruction of this country, that it wouldn't come from without, but from within. Once again, if not born into this culture, you should not be allowed to serve in elected office. And why? They come from incompatible cultures and some that you cannot coexist with, such as Islam. After all, folks, their creed is to kill all infidels. If you are a listener to this podcast, you are most likely defined as an infidel in those cultures and are due for punishment. Now let's talk about the enemies within the gate and maybe the very ones you are breaking bread with. Ted Richard wrote an essay titled "Intellectual Conservatism Needs Fighters to Survive." That title says it all. We are in a cold civil war in America, sponsored by the sleeping watchmen who allowed the enemy of atheism inside the city gates. Those gates being the institutions of power and governance. Worse yet, the greatest child abuse, next to abortion, occurred under the eyes of parents as they allowed their children to be mentally abused and disabled by radical teachers' unions and their members who taught your children to hate God and this country. And all the while, guess what? You were paying for it. In explanation of how the game of political chess and the inevitably existential fight among two forces that cannot coexist is being played, I've described myself as a cross-the-Jordan type Christian conservative, such as where God ordered the Israelites to cross the Jordan and to wipe them all out. In the mold of Abraham and with Isaac, his son Isaac, mine is not to question, but to do or die. I'm perfectly at peace with the God that is, not the one that I want him to be. No one has the intellectual ability nor the knowledge to judge God or to judge one's creator. And if they do so, they're deserving of death. As I've said on numerous occasions, you can't win a war if you don't know that you are in one. What is worse are those people who do know they are in a war and choose to shoot at their own side. My disdain is often spoken of and written about for those who are our real enemies, which is our own sloth. Those who, if they were in the army, would be court-martialed for being AWOL. As Richard contended, those individuals would rather not fight, prefer to ignore the dreadful march of the destructive left, and balk at activist conservatives who attempt to stop the progressive trampling of institutional, legal, and cultural inheritances. Prominent among those troubled by bold right-wing action in the United States, we find intellectual conservatives. And I find them so disgusting. I won't get into naming them, but they're the ones that are always white-knuckling and wringing their hands, and they're too concerned about their legacy, and I call them patricians. Really, they're sissies. The conservative intellectual title has generally become shorthand for a certain kind of respectable, right-leaning, never-Trump academic. These so-called brave scholars lob stones from atop their ivory towers, bruising the backs of those men and women in their own army as they defend the city walls. They believe the work of the tower superior in every way to the point of making the work on the ground not just strategically in error, but perhaps morally wrong. Never mind the role those in the trenches play in defending the tower. Now, while Richard is correct, and I have nothing but utter disdain for the self-proclaimed intellectual frauds on the right, I call them the always wrong but never in doubt crowd. You have heard me comment many times on the nature and the character of the left, who use so many interchangeable terms and adjectives to describe themselves. They were first communists, and then socialists, and then they became liberals and leftists, and then progressives. They are all peas in a pod. What I find so amazing is how their futility and violence in life is directly connected to the denial of reality, which brings on another characteristic they have, and that is called psychosis. Now, they will tell you that they don't believe in God because there is no evidence of it and that it can't be proven. Well, if they were not so intellectually challenged, they would see what is so obvious all around them. But they really live in a state of rebellion because, in fact, they do know. But that puts limitations on how they, in their rebellion, want to live. And that requires also that they make you live in the way that they want you to live. Now, they will say there is no proof of God, while at the same time, they have no proof that there isn't. In fact, except for anecdotally, they can't prove their own existence or even their beginning. They just have anecdotal accounts of it through basically what their parents have told them. If you want to really get technical. Now, I know that sounds all a bit silly, and it is, but they live with logical fallacies, and here we are as a human species who still can't understand or explain where we came from. They devised this fantastical theory that even its originator, Charles Darwin, recanted before he died, and that is somehow we just randomly occurred and came into existence with all of our complexity. All that one need to do is look at the structure of the eye alone, with all of its delicate parts, and one would instantly surmise and reason that this was by design. This type of complexity does not happen randomly, but yeah, that's not convenient for those who are in rebellion. Now that science is moving away from revolution and more toward design, the anxiety on the rebellious left has increased to a fever pitch. It manifests itself in so many ways, and particularly political violence, as they want to control the narrative. But to do that, they have to suppress the truth. They become so sociopathic and enraged that they can't have it their way, that they will destroy everything in the process. As we see in today's political climate, the left has resorted to the use of stochastic terrorism as a means of gaining power. They refuse voter ID because they can't win without cheating. And why is that? Because all the utopianistic ideals have failed 100% in the past. In fact, logically, it's impossible for them or anyone to make their fantasies work. Nevertheless, on their road to tyranny, they always create a foundation built on the confiscation of your means to defend yourself, even though in this country, every challenge to abridge our constitutional right to protect ourselves, even with arms, has been stricken down as unconstitutional. The tyrannical left continues to pursue limitations on that right because once in power, their programs, when implemented, always fail and cause great distress and misery. The left knows that, and they know that the populace with guns will eventually depose them. For those who are not paying attention, which is usually everyone else, it's easy for the left to fake you out, much like the con men did with the old cup and ball trick. Sadly, once in power, the only way to depose the left is through bloodshed, which leads to the very reason I do what I do in these podcasts and have been yelling and warning about since the age of 16. If we don't remove and keep these people out of government, that's where it will end up. Now let's take a look, for instance, at some current examples. In Venezuela, a country who outside of the U.S. has the largest known oil reserves, and the richest country in South America, or at least it once was, the people fell for the socialist lie. The greedy wanted something for nothing, and Chavez and Maduro, the two tyrants that brought Venezuela down, they were communists, and they promised the people everything and delivered them nothing but misery. They confiscated their guns, and all under the guise of safety. Then they oppressed the people, causing 2 million to flee. And on average, the people, the remaining citizens, lost on average 30 pounds each because they were starving. Many of them were scavenging through garbage dumps for food. Chavez and Maduro destroyed the oil industry in their country and turned it into a narco state. It took someone like Trump to turn things around. But before that, don't forget, Maduro had elections where he kept winning, despite overwhelming disapproval of the people. They rigged the elections, and it was so obvious that even the international community refused to recognize Maduro as the duly elected leader. You see, folks, the people could not throw off their shackles, but they were shackles of their own making, just like we're doing here in this country, just like some are doing from state to state, coast to coast in this country, and we have to stop it. Then we have Iran, a country of over 90 million people. They have no guns, and while they wanted to depose their government instead executed 45,000 of their own citizens this year. Now, while Iran was a theocracy, there's little, if any, difference between it and the communist regimes. The two are compatible, that is, communism and Islam together. And that's why we see the mayor of New York being both a communist and a Muslim. There's a compatibility there. That's why you cannot allow idiots and imbeciles and morons the right to vote. They will vote in their own destruction and yours as well. They are essential to tyrants and maintain power that way. They are referred to as useful idiots by the communists. But for the programmers putting together artificial intelligence and teaching it to lie, hopefully they're not, but I guarantee you they probably are, perhaps our next rulers will be mechanical and technological, inasmuch as they have to operate by rules of logic as opposed to what we see coming out of our public education today. There is no syllogistic thinking or deductive reasoning in our children today because it's been taught out of them. Then we have many on the Supreme Court who have lived in a bubble and act as if the Constitution is a suicide pact. Thus, the reason we have Confederate laws, known as sanctuary laws, in over 1,000 communities across this nation, nullifying federal law. Folks, we have a slim chance to avoid us being sacked by the barbarians, as Rome was 2,000 years ago. History does repeat itself. To survive, you must find your way back to church. But that won't be an easy task either, as the churches have become infiltrated by the woke, the false teachers, the heretics, just as I recently told you about the not-so-reverend Rigby in Texas, who preaches that God is non-binary and supports abortion and homosexuality and a slew of other heresies. You will have to find a solid Bible-believing church, and when you pray, just don't sit there. Get up and put feet to your prayers before you lose your country. Remember, it's not evil's fault that the world and your country is falling apart. It's because good people did nothing. Now, before I conclude my remarks today, I want to talk to you, particularly Kentuckians, and this applies to my audience nationwide. And that's because all elections now have become national. And why do I say that? Because the numbers are so close in the Senate and the House that what happens in one state can affect the entire nation. And right now in Kentucky, Mitch McConnell is stepping down, and there is a race in Kentucky to replace him in the U.S. Senate. And now that competition has winnowed down to Daniel Cameron and Andy Barr. And this is very important for you to understand. Daniel Cameron used to be our Attorney General, and he's a fine gentleman, but he lost. And that's why we have Governor Beshear, who's now running or thinking he's going to run for president. I knew that Daniel Cameron didn't have the fire in the belly when he ran for governor, and I knew that he couldn't raise the money. And he didn't, and he lost. And he stuck us with Andy Beshear. So what's so important about this? Well, he thinks he's going to win the Senate race in Kentucky. And that's so important for not only Kentucky, but for the whole nation. We don't need a radical, woke Democrat from Kentucky in the Senate. Well, let me give you some news here. Daniel Cameron just ran out of money. He's pulled ads, and here we are just 1 week out from the primary in Kentucky, and he doesn't have any money, and he doesn't have the money to carry over into the general election. So it proves what I've been saying all along. He's a good man, but first of all, he doesn't have the fire in the belly, number one. And number two, he can't raise money. And money is the mother's milk of politics. Now, another important factor here is that Daniel Cameron lost the 4th District in Kentucky by 19 points. That's the district that Andy Barr has been your representative for 14 years in Congress. And he has carried that district for 14 years, but Daniel Cameron lost it by 19 points. So not only is he out of money now, but he cannot carry the 4th. He lost it by big time just several years ago. So you don't want to put your bets on that horse. Andy Barr is one that's very accomplished, has sponsored many bills, has supported President Trump. President Trump has endorsed Barr, and Barr knows the ropes. He's been up there 14 years, and he will transfer from the House over to the Senate. We cannot risk another loss with Daniel Cameron. And that's hard to say because I know Daniel is a good man, a decent man, but he can't win this. And the statistics are there. And I've been at this game for 30 years. And I said this 4 years ago, and I'm saying it again now. He can't win. He doesn't have the money. He's already out of money. He can't do the ads, and he can't carry the 4th. And with that, the Democrat would win. So I'm putting my money on Andy Barr, and I hope the rest of you do, and that you wake up to this fact. These are facts of life. This is political chess, and we can't afford a loss here. So with that, folks, that's enough to digest for today. Write out your action plan and put feet to it. And thanks for joining us. I'm Jack Richardson for Jack's Corner.